Nestled in the heart of Pennsylvania lies the small industrial town of Johnstown. It's the kind of place where everyone seems to know each other, where families grow up on the same blocks their grandparents once did, and where people leave their doors unlocked without thinking twice. But in 2018, this tight-knit community was shaken to its core by a tragedy so brutal and senseless that it left lasting scars. This is the story of a hard-working mother, Margaret Douglas, and the boy she tried to help, only to be betrayed in the most horrific way imaginable. Before her name became etched in headlines, Margaret was simply known as Maggie to those who loved her. A devoted single mother, a factory worker, and a woman who went out of her way to offer kindness to those who had little. But her compassion would be her undoing when she crossed paths with Gavin Ramsey, a troubled 17-year-old with a darkness that no one fully understood until it was too late. Chapter 1. The woman behind the tragedy. Margaret Douglas was 45 years old in the spring of 2018. Her life was far from glamorous, but she found peace in routine. Her days began before the sun rose, starting her shift at a local chocolate factory on the outskirts of Johnstown. By noon, she was home, prepping meals for her teenage daughter, handling bills, and volunteering at the community center when she could squeeze in the time. She had been raising her daughter, Erin, on her own since the girl was in diapers. Her marriage had ended early, more of a storm than a union, and Margaret never really looked back. She didn't have time for dating or drama. Everything she did was for Erin. People in the neighborhood described her as tough as nails, but with a warm heart. She'd shovel snow for elderly neighbors, cook meals for those in need, and always offered rides to the teenagers walking home from school in the rain. Her small house was modest but filled with life, a flower garden in front, wind chimes on the porch, and the scent of baked goods often drifting out from the kitchen window. But behind Margaret's resilience was also vulnerability. A woman who carried her own history of trauma, of poverty, abuse, and lost opportunities. That's what made her so empathetic to kids in trouble, especially the ones who reminded her of Erin. It was no surprise when she took an interest in a boy from a few blocks over, someone who seemed lost in the world. Gavin Ramsey. Chapter 2. Gavin Ramsey, a storm brewing. Gavin Ramsey was 17 years old but looked younger. He had a boyish face, short hair, and a gaze that often shifted downward. Most people barely noticed him in a crowd. He lived with his family in a rundown part of Johnstown known more for police patrols than playgrounds. His record wasn't spotless. He'd been in trouble at school, fighting, vandalism, skipping classes. He had bounced between behavioral programs and even faced juvenile charges for petty theft. His home life, from what little the community knew, was rocky at best. Teachers described him as withdrawn and volatile. A guidance counselor once noted that he showed signs of deep emotional disturbance, sudden outbursts, fixation on violence, and a refusal to connect with others. But he had slipped through the cracks. No one thought Gavin was dangerous. Troubled, yes, but Johnstown had seen troubled kids before. He was viewed more as a lost soul than a threat. And that's exactly what Margaret saw in him. Another kid who needed guidance. Someone to save. It started with small gestures. She offered him food, a ride home one rainy afternoon, a listening ear. Eventually, Gavin began stopping by her house after school. Margaret encouraged it. She thought a little kindness could go a long way. But what she didn't know was that Gavin wasn't looking for help. He was looking for something else entirely. Chapter 3. A growing obsession. In the months leading up to the tragedy, Gavin Ramsey's behavior shifted in alarming ways. His visits to Margaret's house became more frequent, uninvited at times. He asked personal questions about her life. He stared at her daughter, Erin, in ways that made Erin uncomfortable. He lingered after dark. Neighbors began to whisper about the strange teen who was always hanging around. Margaret, ever trusting, brushed off the concerns. He just needs someone to believe in him, she said more than once. Erin didn't argue with her mother, but deep down, she felt something was off. There was something about Gavin that made her skin crawl. At school, Gavin was spiraling. He wrote disturbing short stories about mutilation and death. He drew graphic images in the margins of his notebooks. He stopped participating in class and became fixated on online forums about serial killers and gore. One classmate later recalled that Gavin once said, "I wonder what it feels like to kill someone. Just to know what it feels like." No one reported these behaviors. No one intervened. And then, in April 2018, Gavin stopped showing up altogether. He dropped out of school. Vanished from sight, except for one place. Margaret's neighborhood. Chapter 4. The night everything changed. It was April 6, 2018, a Friday. The air was cool, and the streets of Johnstown were quiet. Erin had gone to a friend's house for the weekend, and Margaret was home alone. She spent the evening watching TV, folding laundry, and unwinding from her week. At some point that evening, Gavin arrived at her doorstep. He knocked. She opened. They talked, briefly. No one knows what was said. Perhaps he asked for food. Perhaps he needed a place to stay. Perhaps he had something far darker in mind all along. What is known as this? At some point that night, Gavin Ramsey snapped. What happened inside Margaret's home is unthinkable. She was brutally assaulted, beaten, and murdered, strangled and stabbed repeatedly. The autopsy would later reveal injuries so severe that investigators initially believed there had to be more than one attacker. But it was just him. Gavin stayed in the house after the murder. He tried to clean up. He attempted to stage the scene. He went through her belongings, took photos, and fled before sunrise. Margaret's body was discovered the next day, by her daughter Erin, who had come home early. The scene was something no child should ever witness. And from that moment on, Johnstown was never the same. Chapter 5. The aftermath begins. Police swarmed the scene. The crime was so gruesome it was unlike anything they'd seen in decades. There was no sign of forced entry. Nothing stolen. But the violence, the personal nature of it, pointed investigators to someone close. Within 48 hours, the name Gavin Ramsey surfaced. He wasn't hiding. He had posted strange messages on social media. Dark poetry. A cryptic photo of a candle burning in a dark room. When detectives questioned him, he was calm, too calm. Eventually, the evidence became overwhelming. His DNA was found at the scene. His fingerprints. Surveillance footage showed him walking near Margaret's house that night. A friend later came forward, saying Gavin had confessed to doing something bad, really bad. He was arrested. The town was stunned. How could someone like Margaret, a woman who gave so much, be destroyed by someone she tried to help? Why didn't anyone stop it? Why didn't anyone see it coming? But this was just the beginning. The trial, the haunting confessions, the psychological profile that would leave even seasoned investigators shaken. To be continued?